Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm Liam Crafton Jr., aka Zorvalchan Less Than Guru, and in today's episode of Tips and Tricks for Palladium, a thing that I would like to introduce or slide in from other games would be the concept of combat points or action points. If you look at D&D, you can think of it as advantage or even their inspiration, or their alternate rule for proficiency bonuses, which is instead of a flat number, you gain a D4 or a D6 or something like that. In other games, they might add or manipulate the die or the dice rolls or your totals in some way. Karma for Earth Dawn, possibilities for Torg, etc. This is something that I really have always loved. Character points in old Star Wars. I'm line developer for Torg Eternity, so I love possibilities both for Classic and Torg Eternity. Karma, all the editions of Earth Dawn I've done, so it's something that I've really liked. It's just something that I wasn't sure if it would break the resource management type aspect of an old school game, which is what the feel of this Palladium First Edition campaign that I started a few years ago. And after watching a couple of other YouTube videos that suggested using this for old school type games, I decided to give it a chance. I told my players, hey, this is something new I want to introduce. I don't want it to get a decision stun. I don't want you to have to think about it. So make the decision immediately whether you're going to use a combat point or not. And basically what I do is a combat point is a D6, and you can add it to a strike. My game, I don't allow it for parries and dodges, but a lot of players seem to forget that. What I do instead is I have it subtract for damage if they take damage. So if they are striking, if they are the person who's swinging the sword or casting the spell or shooting the bow, they can add they can spend a combat point. You can do that after you roll, is what I allow. That way they can kind of see, is it something that is going to be useless or is it going to be useful, because I have them as very rare resources, which I'll explain in a moment. But I have them roll, and then they can decide whether or not they are going to spend the combat point, and then they can roll a d6 and add it to their whether it's the natural roll and then the bonuses and then that d6, or you figure out everything and then you add the d6. It all is the same math. It's just different orders, but that's what I do. And then for damage, before I tell them the damage, for the most part, there's been a couple of times where people have forgotten or we've gone a long time between sessions that I'll let it slide. But the main rule is for damage, they have to decide at that point whether or not they're going to use a combat point to reduce damage by a d6. And in my system, because I have counting arrows and we use ISP, and I make sure that things regenerate instead of saying, okay, everybody fill up their ISP or your magic points, because I have magic points. I say, okay, you've rested for 2 hours. That's 2 per hour, so you get 4 back. Or if somebody has gotten high enough level that they regenerate at 3, then it would be 2 times 3, so they get 6 back. Or meditation for ISP can double that. But I'm really strict about them healing or gaining ISP, magic points, arrows, stuff like that. So this is a resource that I wished to be tracked, as well as allowing some fun for the players so that they can hit on those really narrow chances where they've only just they've missed by like a point or two, or it's one that they could maybe need 6 to hit, and that's what they roll and they take the chance, but it gives them some player agency in it. So you get 5 plus 1 per level. So you start off with 6, and then once you attain second level, then you gain 7. And once you attain third level, then you get 8. And those 6 that you get, you spend them, they're gone. They don't regenerate. They don't come back. So some people might hoard them for a while. Some people might use them all so they don't have to remember, oh yeah, I forgot that I had combat points, or some might space them out. When I talk about experience, I'll get into that. But basically, from my average that I've noticed over time and how I handle experience points, my players take about 6 sessions to get to level 2 and 6 more to get to level 3, and then XP doubles. So then it takes 12 additional sessions to get to level 4. So with that 6 or 7-ish, it's like they can spend a combat point. If they want to pace themselves, they can spend a combat point per session. And then at level 2, they have one to kind of work with. And by that time, they kind of learn how they should spend or what fits them and their pattern for using combat points. And then when they have 8, but it's going to take 12 sessions, they can better judge on how to do things. And so far, it's worked really well. It hasn't completely destroyed the game. It hasn't made the player characters overpowered. It's just given them something that NPCs don't have, because in my world, I have asymmetrical monsters. I don't do the modern Palladium. When I say modern Palladium, I mean about like halfway through Palladium First Edition. Late 80s, 90s, I don't do it like Palladium where all their NPCs are like 16th level ranger and the skills and everything normally work out to be the same. Every once in a while, somebody will notice something and then wonder, oh, is this canon or is this not? In my games, I don't care. I make an opponent to last a certain amount of time, usually a session or usually even an encounter. I don't need to know all of their skills. I don't need to know their percentages for 100% of the things that you need for characters, because they're the ones out exploring and doing things. So a lot of that I trim. I use the first part of First Edition where you go through an adventure and it gives you an armor rating, it gives you a damage, and it gives you hit points. And if you're lucky, it might give you a couple of attributes, and that's it, because that's kind of all you needed. But having said that, that's kind of the way that I do. NPCs can have different special abilities and stuff that player characters don't have. So this is something that I give to player characters or to players for their characters to use. And it hasn't hurt my games at all. It's kept a couple of people alive. It got a couple of good hits in, and it's kind of saved the party's bacon every now and then, but it hasn't done something so dramatic that I felt that I needed to take it away. So I suggest using combat points. Again, depending on what type of game you are running, you might wish to alter a little bit. Torg, original Torg, the classic, you would gain it as experience. Palladium, you really can't do that, but you were able to get, and then you spent, and you gained more, and you spent them, etc. In Torg Eternity, you get a certain amount, usually 3, and they refresh every act. An act normally take a session or 2. The smaller adventures, they are meant to take a session, so they refresh. So at the end of the adventure, if you get, or the act, if you have more, you drop down to 3. If you have less, then you raise up to 3, and that kind of promotes people to pay so they don't lose them, or to use them so they don't lose them. But then they know if they're at 0, if they can get to the next act or do some other things, then they can refresh. If that's not the type of game that you're not so big into resource management of counting arrows, torches, figuring out how much food is needed, etc., then that might be a system that works for you. You might also change the dice sizes. You might use an earlier Earth Dawn mechanism where the kind of the races or species that were the smaller, or the ones that didn't have a lot of inherent bonuses to them, had a bigger dice, and the other ones had a smaller die. You might look at that and have that as an offset for the size dice. If you use my size category dice, or even the Palladium, the gnome sizes are smaller, so maybe you'll give them an action point or a combat point that's a D8. Everybody else gets a D6 except for the large, and you give the large a D4 because they're already smacking things hard with their big large size weapon for your wolf and your ogres and your trolls. But you can figure out how you want to use that. If you want to do every level they gain something and then they got to manage it. If you want to do a refresh every session, if you want to do it a refresh every adventure, if you want to have it where it's a straight, nope, it's only when you level. If you want to have it where, hey, if you do something cool at the game and you make everybody happy, or you come up with something really cool, you get a combat point, or other people can vote on it, or the game master can be impressed and give it to you. However you wish to settle with your group could work, but in my having used it at least a half a year, I haven't had any detriments because of that introduction. So just wanted to say that might be a cool thing that you add to your game. Other than that, I am Liam Crafton Jr., aka Zorval Chan Less Than Guru, and until next time, I will catch you later.